The National Museum in Stockholm was designed between 1847 and 1849 by the Berlin architect Friedrich August Stüler. It is a large freestanding building of 3 stories located across the Strömmen waterway from the Royal Palace, from where most of the collection for the new museum was transferred. The building was opened in 1863 for a temporary exhibition, and then in 1866 with the collection properly installed. At the beginning of the planning, the relatively new building type of the public museum was the largest, artistically most ambitious and most expensive state building of its era in Sweden, which attracted attention both through the well-thought-out adaptation of the building to its purpose and through the use of the latest methods of construction technology. As Rasmus Wern put it rather succinctly in 2018, for a long time the museum was the capital's leading work of modern architecture. So far, my beginning of the chapter in the book, and now I shall leave that and just cherry pick, as it were, a couple of aspects I find interesting about this. I'm not walking you through the whole complicated planning history that has been done several times, and there are lots lacunae still, actually. But as I said, I'm cherry picking a couple of aspects I find interesting, and which may perhaps be enlightened. And enlightening. So the building with the floor plans, just to point out the basic situation, it's got a central core with the public buildings, the public aspects, staircases, reception hall, so to speak, and then U-shaped wings on either side. So it's basically a rectangle with a sort of internal courtyard and then one wing cutting through that internal courtyard. The interesting thing is, of course, that you have interesting facades and interesting interiors. And the subtlety of the facade in its arrangement of color and variation of openings is really quite extraordinary. I also did my photograph yesterday, and we had splendid sunshine, and it was really absolutely wonderful to see at sort of 5 o'clock in the evening this mature, mellow color scheme, which of course the restoration up to 2018 brought back. So I think that is one of the most exciting aspects of this building, actually, and I think that photograph somehow captures it. Stüler called the Borgham limestone, which he very much advocated to use, beautiful and earnest. And I think that is really a very good sort of combination and sums it up nicely, particularly if you think of the buildings next door to it. I think this one, where we are now standing in and sitting in, is not actually beautiful and earnest. You would find different sort of adjectives to describe that, but I think one can see what Stüler meant. The section of the staircase you see is one of the sort of most interesting drawings in this whole set of several hundred drawings, because it just not only gives the architectural information, but also an idea of the arrangement of the collection. And most of the pieces you see there indicated are not necessarily actually in the collection, but they give you the differentiation between the Livrustkammern ideas on the ground floor, and then you see nothing for the main floor. Because obviously this was originally intended for the library, so that it's just doors leading off. But then you've got the grand staircase in one single flight leading up to the 3rd floor, and then you end up in the upper hall, the upper staircase hall, which is receiving you, so to speak, with a sort of well-thought-out iconographical program before you actually enter the individual rooms of the collection. So the items receiving you up there are actually casts, plaster casts from antique sculpture, and they are receiving you in the sense of that they provide a survey of classical beauty as a preparation to the works seen in the galleries afterwards. Plaster casts, of course, have for a long time played an important role in the teaching of the academies, and now they are moving out of the academy, so to speak, to a public space to be seen. neither in architectural form nor in the items on display, but in the idea of an elaborate reception space, this upper staircase hall would be comparable to the rotunda of Schinkel's museum in Berlin, which is likewise an introductory chapter to what comes afterwards. Of the many intricate planning decisions, I would just mention one. And that was an idea of Stüler's how he would actually bind together various parts of the interior of this building, starting on the outside. And you know that you get in the centerpiece this little porch now, which originally was not meant to be a porch, but had the same elevation. So the idea is of an arch supported by its own columns, situated between pilaster strips or pilasters, as basically an architectural motif going back to the Colosseum. So one of the oldest sort of architectural motifs using arches, as it were. Now, this idea is now carried inside the museum, and you can see that this form of three arches supported on their own columns are repeated upstairs on the first floor as a screen on the first floor, and framing, as it were, the single-flight monumental staircase to the actual correction. And so the invitation, so to speak, to go through these arches is repeated outside and inside. And then when you reach the upper end of that staircase hall, you see that the whole room structure up there is a repetition of this idea of huge arches spanning the whole room, sitting on their own columns and supporting the roof structure. And then, not shown really, but all of you will know the place, the situation is then repeated on the third floor, because you have another arrangement of these three openings to screen the apse behind. So it's a series of grand architectural motifs that runs through the whole public spaces of the museum, and it provides variety and a change of material, because on the outside it is just the same limestone as the rest of the building. In the staircase it is sort of black marble, and when you come to the upper staircase hall, you actually get monolithic fluted columns of white Italian marble with black veins. This is almost a presentation of architecture per se. The single column always have been considered to be the most noble element in architecture. And of course, it is not only supporting the roof structure, it is also supporting the roundels with the portraits of famous artists of the past. So in musicology, you would probably call that an augmentation. The motif gets grander and grander as you move on. And Stüler must have been very fond of these columns, because the same columns, fluted, white, veined in black, he used in the Neues Museum in Berlin and in the throne room of the Grand Ducal Palace in Schwerin. So you always wonder whether somebody had an account with the marble producer in Italy and could actually draw on that frequently. For the external inspiration, Stüler looked to Italy without copying any facade in particular, but the connection to Venetian palace facades has been long a part of writing about the Nationalmuseum. And indeed, Stüler had been to Italy only in 1845. And what you see there is one of the pages from his sketchbook with the Palazzo Balbi-Venier. So obviously something like that is at the back of his mind, even though he is not copying that literally. And I think that's an important point. The evocation is one to Venice. Stüler's historicism is never a literal copy, but always an allusion in his own composition. Now, we will not be able to be completely silent about the aspects of the planning history and some of the architects that were involved in earlier stages. And indeed, that will bring us to the contribution of Friedrich August. So we see in the upper register his very early design for a museum, which was already meant for a different place in Stockholm, but of course was more study project, really, rather than already for a building project in Stockholm. But the importance of this design is that it was appended to the petition for a new museum to give the politicians, the parliamentarians, the king, an idea of what this could look like, not necessarily what should be executed. And this design by Skolander met with a lot of criticism, which was partly due not really so much for the architectural appearance, but for the inexperience of Skolander, who had not had a single building to his name so far and no experience whatsoever in running a major building site. Still, this design provided literally some foundations for the museum that were taken over, and that is basically the idea of the floor plan, which had been taken over by Stüler in his own designs. So the four-winged arms around a courtyard with a central connection stayed put, one of the main ideas throughout the planning. The library was not yet envisaged to go to this building, so obviously you didn't have to take care of it, and therefore there are only 2 stories. This design, meeting criticism, was now reworked several times by Skolander, and his third design, which you see bottom left, is now here in comparison in a photo montage with Stüler's design. And I think that is, of course, a fascinating combination. You are seeing that both are using Italianate forms in the sense of the Rundbogenstil as advocated in Heinrich Hübsch's seminal article of 1828. Skolander's ideas are more Florentine in feeling, almost 3 even stories with the same type of window throughout. And the comparison with Stüler's reworking, I think, is a lesson in architectural composition. You can see how proportioning suddenly plays a role, how grouping of forms and themes plays a role, how individual parts are articulated on expense of others, how they are distributed across the facade. It's in Stüler playing on themes of unity and variation by means of stressing certain forms and subordinating others. In short, it is creating a lively and enlivened facade as opposed to just an even staccato of the same forms. The other person I think one should mention is Johann Klehm, and he plays a really sort of too little role in the whole thing. And I'm showing you his design for the museum, which is very much based on Berlin ideas. So he is combining Schinkel's theater and parts of the Neues Museum by Stüler, and indeed Schinkel's museum must have been one of the reasons why Stüler was given the commission together with his own design for the Neues Museum, which you see here in this model. And of course, the main question remains why Stüler really was asked to join this competition, and I would like to give 2 or 3 answers to that very briefly. First of all, where would you go if you want to do a purpose-built museum in the 1840s? You basically go to England or you go to Germany. Dulwich or the National Gallery in London does not play a role. In Germany, you go to Klenz's Munich or to Schinkel's Berlin. So it was Schinkel's Berlin. And Schinkel provided a solution. Stüler had been his assistant, and therefore, and he had been his successor in the Office of Works. So therefore, I think it was natural in a way to approach him. And the second thing, which I find important, and that has been overlooked, is that Stüler had his own connections to Stockholm. And I would like to mention 2. From 1845 onwards, Stüler had already been a member of the Royal Academy in Stockholm. And so there must have been contacts. I mean, somebody must have proposed him for this. Somebody must have written to him. There must have been a correspondence. Stüler was already a known quantity in Stockholm when he received received the commission. And a second important thing is that the Stüler family had a personal connection to the royal family and to the Queen. Because Stüler was married to Charlotte von Meek, whose sister Philippine had been the governess of Queen Josephine. And indeed, the sister of Charlotte von Meek was married to Stüler's brother. So it was a very close-knit family. And indeed, the Queen constantly kept contact with her erstwhile governess. And indeed, when Philippine Meek died, the Queen paid for the monument, the tombstone in Berlin. This is on the Dorotheenstädtischer Friedhof, and you can see it has a touching inscription by the Queen remembering her old teacher. So I think that was a very interesting double bind situation. When the situation arose and Stüler was asked, the king would actually send a member of his military household in the shape of Kleen to present the designs and ask for his opinion. And of course he would address Kleen to an architect who was already a member of his academy in Stockholm. So he was an honorary Swede, so to speak. And then I think, as I said, a double bind situation. Under the circumstances, Stüler could not say no. On the other hand, once the designs had been accepted, the king had to support their execution. And that really was a sort of a complicated situation because funds were constantly running out, and one had to think how this could get organized, and basically it was Kleen who sorted out these things. The final point I wanted to make is the different fate of the two museums. The Neues Museum of Stüler in Berlin, of course, was damaged during the war very considerably. And then, of course, there was neglect during the GDR times. So when people started to think about a reconstruction of this building, it was done to a very different concept to what was happening in the Stockholm restoration of the current years. The idea in Berlin is that you basically conserve a ruin. So what was there is now, with great care, conserved, but everything else is done entirely new by David Chipperfield.
I'm afraid that we actually have to end for the program. But
yeah. So can I have my final slide and just finish by saying that without Stüler, there would not have been designs for this museum, but without Kleen, there would have been no museum physically. Thank you.